militant rhetoric that caused many to say we should embrace, from the white power structure, that's what they called it then, we should embrace Dr. King and the others as opposed to having to deal with the consequences of the militant liberation theology of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. Let's go to the next slide. That movement inspires a young man named Cassius Clay to join the Nation of Islam, and as he accepts the theology of the Nation of Islam, he says that according to his religion, that they should not take part in the wars that take the lives of innocent people. In fact, many of you might know the famous phrase of Muhammad Ali. He said, no Vietnamese ever called me nigger. And so under those circumstances, he gave a fuel to the civil rights movement. He ultimately loses his crown. His crown is taken because of his resistance to the war. He becomes an icon as a Muslim for the anti-war movement. And after many appeals, his case goes to the Supreme Court. They vindicate him, and his crown is restored. And he is probably, as people say, he is the most recognized face on the planet Earth today. He continues to inspire millions, and it is out of that movement that came from the Nation of Islam's liberation theology. Let's go to the next slide. That movement then inspired some of those who were involved in the civil rights movement, but who were dissatisfied, particularly after the assassination of Dr. King. People like H. Rap Brown, who was part of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They later merged with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and Angela Davis and the others who were part of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. He, subsequent to that engagement, is arrested, sent to prison, and in prison, H. Rap Brown accepts Islam and becomes Imam Jamil Al-Amin, where he continues to struggle and organize down in his native Georgia. Just anecdotally, he is currently in prison related to activities that he believes go all the way back to the civil rights movement. But these are the individuals who were inspired by the militancy of Islam. I have a slide next that you don't have in your set, but there was a period in the 70s and 80s of groups that were called either black nationalist or cultural nationalist organizations. The most popular of them is the one that created the holiday for African Americans called Kwanzaa, headed by a man who took the name Maulana Ron Karenga. Maulana is a term that you find in Islam as a teacher, alim, Maulana, that Ron Karenga created a theology very much akin to the concepts in Islam, the 7 principles, Nia, from the Arabic word intention, Imani is one of the principles, faith. You have the first principle, the unity of God, the unity of our people. And you have also groups they call cultural nationalists. Most notably, the poet Dr. Hakeem Mahambuti used to be a faculty member at Howard University, my alma mater. And one of their thought leaders came to me one day and he said, during Kwanzaa, he said, Imam, he said, Johari, I wasn't Imam then. Johari, we need something in our movement that would provide a moral guide for conduct among African Americans, blacks in America. something akin to hadith that would lay out their conduct of family life and charity and service and so on. And I was amazed that even in this period, we're talking about in the 80s, that the Islamic ideology would still be pushing forward in the black liberation movements. Let's go to 2 more slides. The next slide. That I remember in the anti-apartheid movement, students organizing, the rhetoric of Malcolm X continued to be an influence on our resistance movement against apartheid in South Africa. In many ways, the resistance in Palestine to occupation, and even today, the tenor, the spirit of the Black Lives Matters movement is influenced fundamentally by this liberation theology that you found coming out of many of these groups that claimed Islamic roots. The last slide has a picture of Dick Gregory, who was a poet and activist, still alive, lives in the D.C. area. And Dick Gregory said something to me that I'll never forget. He said it like this. I put it on the slide a little differently. He said that in the struggle for blacks in America, that the theological and liberation theology resident in Islam is independent of interpretation and control by Europeans, by whites. And that for him, he believes that that's an important element that keeps that influence free from the motivations of being co-opted by European theology. I'm going to close with that, saying that I think fundamentally at the bottom of this is that driving force that says that there's nothing worthy of worship except God and God alone. It is what drove the early enslaved Africans. Notice I didn't call them slaves. They're enslaved Africans. Drove them to a consistent move toward resisting slavery and occupation. I would probably say one last thing, and that is on the continent of Africa. You will notice those countries in West Africa and North Africa that had an Islamic liberation theology, they became independent from colonialism decades before you found those in Southern Africa becoming free from colonization. I believe that there is something inspired by the liberation theology found in Islam that has contributed to this movement. With that, I thank you so much for listening. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum to you too.